The first time I accused my husband of cheating, he laughed. Not nervously, not defensively, just amused, like the idea itself was ridiculous. "Emily," he said calmly, "you're being paranoid." And for a while, I believed him, because when someone repeats something often enough, you start questioning yourself. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I was looking for problems where none existed. But there was one small problem with that explanation. A phone. Not his normal phone. Not the one he used every day. Not the one he left on the kitchen counter. A different phone. The one he thought I would never find. My name is Emily. 3 years ago, I believed I had a stable marriage. Not perfect, but comfortable, predictable. My husband David worked in finance. Long hours, lots of meetings, constant emails. I worked from home, which meant I handled most of the household routine. Groceries, bills, dinner. The quiet details that keep a life running smoothly. For most of our marriage, David appreciated that. At least that's what he said. But about 6 months before everything collapsed, something changed. At first it was subtle. Small behavioral shifts. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. David started taking his phone everywhere. Bathroom, shower, even short trips to take out the trash. When I asked about it, he laughed again. "Work is crazy right now." Reasonable. Then came the late meetings. 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. Again. Completely normal for someone in finance. But the moment my instincts started screaming came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was doing laundry in the bedroom. David had already left for work. When I moved his gym bag, something heavy slid to the bottom. At first I assumed it was a charger, or maybe headphones. But when I unzipped the pocket, I saw something unexpected. A phone. Black. Simple. No case. No identifying marks. Not David's phone. And for a moment, my brain tried to invent explanations. Maybe it was a work device. Maybe he borrowed it from someone. Maybe it wasn't even functional. But when I pressed the power button, the screen lit up instantly, and the lock screen showed a single notification. "Miss you already," from someone named Lena. My hands went cold, because suddenly, all the strange behavior made perfect sense. The late nights, the hidden phone, the constant texting. But even then, a small part of me still hoped there was an explanation. Maybe Lena was a coworker. Maybe the message meant something else. Maybe I was still overreacting. Then the phone buzzed again. Another message. "Did you tell her yet?" That was the moment the illusion disappeared, because no innocent conversation starts with that question. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone, trying to decide what to do next. Confront David immediately, or learn the whole truth first. And the problem with secrets is that once you discover one, you start wondering how many others exist. So instead of confronting him, I unlocked the phone, because David had made one very big mistake. He had assumed I would never find it, which meant he hadn't bothered hiding anything inside. And what I discovered in the next 10 minutes proved something terrifying. The second phone wasn't just for one affair. It was for an entire life I knew nothing about. And by the time David came home that evening, I already understood something he didn't. The real problem wasn't that I had opened the phone. The real problem was that I had read everything. Once you open a door like that, you can't close it again. You can't unread the messages. You can't unknow the truth. And every new piece of information makes the previous lie clearer. At first, I expected to find one conversation, one woman, one affair. That would have been devastating, but simple. Instead, I found something far worse. The phone contained dozens of conversations, different names, different photos, different message threads. Lena, Maya, Sophie, Rachel. Each conversation looked similar. Flirty messages, late-night texts, plans to meet. And each thread stretched back months. My stomach twisted as I scrolled through them, because suddenly, David's late meetings started forming a pattern. Tuesday nights, Thursday nights, sometimes Saturdays. Not random at all, carefully scheduled. Each woman had her own rhythm, her own time slot, her own set of lies David had told her. With Lena, he was in the middle of a complicated separation. With Maya, he claimed his marriage was basically over. With Sophie, he said something even worse. My wife is paranoid. I stared at that message for a long time because suddenly, his laughter from weeks earlier made perfect sense. Every time I asked a question, every time I noticed something strange, every time I trusted my instincts, David wasn't just dismissing my concerns, he was rehearsing the story, and the women believed him. Because people rarely question the version of events they want to believe. One conversation stood out more than the others. Lena, unlike the others, her messages were more emotional, more personal. She wasn't just flirting, she was invested, scrolling further down the conversation. I found the moment their relationship had changed. Lena, when are you telling her? David, soon. Lena, you've said that for 2 months. David, I know. 2 months. That meant David had been promising to leave me long before I even suspected anything. But the message that truly shocked me came next. David, just be patient. David, everything will be easier once the house situation is resolved. The house. Our house. Which meant something very disturbing. David wasn't just cheating. He was planning a future. And the women he was talking to believed they were part of it. I set the phone down on the bed, trying to slow my breathing, trying to think clearly, because the instinctive reaction was obvious. Confront him, expose everything, end the marriage immediately. But another thought appeared instead. If David had been living this double life for months, how much deeper did it go? How many lies had he told? How many plans had he made? How many promises had he broken? And the only way to answer those questions was to keep watching. So when David came home that evening, I acted exactly the same. Hey, he said casually, how was your day? Normal, I replied. He kissed my cheek, walked into the kitchen, poured himself a drink, completely relaxed, because he believed his secret was still safe. But as he sat there texting on his regular phone, I knew something he didn't. I had already seen the entire script. The lies, the excuses, the promises, and most importantly, the mistakes. Because when someone tries to manage multiple secrets, eventually those secrets collide, and when they do, everything falls apart. All I had to do was wait. Because the second phone wasn't just evidence of David's affair. It was a map, and it was about to lead me directly to the moment his entire secret life collapsed. The strange thing about discovering a secret is how quickly your perspective changes. The same house, the same husband, the same daily routine, but suddenly, everything feels staged, like you're watching a performance instead of living a life. For the next few days, I didn't confront David. I didn't mention the phone. I didn't accuse him of anything. Instead, I started studying him. The second phone gave me something incredibly useful, a schedule. David's messages revealed exactly when he planned to see Lena. Friday night, 7:30 p.m., according to his normal phone. That evening was a client dinner. I smiled when I read the message, because suddenly I knew exactly where he would be. Friday arrived. David left the house around 6, dressed more carefully than usual. New shirt, cologne, a slightly nervous energy. "Big meeting tonight," he said casually. "Good luck," I replied. Then I waited 10 minutes, got in my car, and followed him. He didn't drive downtown toward the financial district, where his office was. Instead, he drove across the city, to a small restaurant I had never seen before. Quiet, dim lighting, the kind of place couples choose for private dinners. I parked across the street, watched him walk inside, and 20 minutes later, Lena arrived. She was younger than I expected, maybe 28, dark hair, confident posture, the kind of woman who clearly believed she was about to meet someone important. When she walked into the restaurant, I could see the excitement on her face, which made something painfully obvious. She didn't think she was the other woman. She thought she was the future. Through the restaurant window, I could see them talking, laughing, leaning toward each other across the table. David looked completely relaxed, completely comfortable, like this wasn't a secret life, but his real one. I sat there for almost 40 minutes, watching, learning, understanding. Because every few minutes, David's second phone buzzed, messages from other women, Maya asking about a Saturday date, Sophie sending a photo, Rachel asking if he was still serious about leaving his wife. And suddenly, I understood something horrifying. David wasn't juggling 2 relationships. He was juggling 5. The level of organization required for that was almost impressive. Carefully spaced meetings, carefully tailored lies, carefully maintained illusions. Each woman believed she was special. Each woman believed she was different from the others, and none of them knew about the rest. Until that moment, I had been angry, betrayed, confused. But watching David laugh with Lena while his second phone filled with messages from other women, something inside me shifted. The anger faded, replaced by something colder, clarity. Because David thought the second phone was protecting him, but in reality, it was connecting every single lie, which meant something very simple. If the right people saw those messages, the entire structure would collapse instantly. 5 women, 5 different stories, 5 different promises, all built on the same lie. And when lies like that collide, the fallout is catastrophic. I drove home before David finished dinner. By the time he walked through the door 2 hours later, I was sitting on the couch watching television. "How was your night?" I asked. "Long," he sighed. "Client meetings are exhausting." "Of course they are." I smiled softly. "Get some rest." David nodded, clearly relieved that I hadn't asked any more questions. But as he walked upstairs, I looked at the second phone sitting beside me, because now I understood exactly how his secret life worked, and more importantly, how to destroy it. By the time I finished watching David's dinner with Lena, I already knew one thing: confronting him wouldn't work. David had been lying successfully for months, maybe longer. That meant he was good at it. Fast explanations, quick denials, perfectly rehearsed excuses. If I confronted him directly, he would simply do what he always did: call me paranoid, laugh, turn the situation around. But the problem with juggling multiple lies is that the lies eventually meet each other, and when they do, the liar rarely survives the collision. The second phone made everything possible. Every contact, every message, every promise, all stored in one place. And the most interesting part? David never deleted anything, because he assumed no one would ever open it. Saturday morning, David left the house early for the gym. At least that's what he told me, the moment his car disappeared down the street. I picked up the second phone. The first message I sent was to Lena. "I can't keep lying anymore." She replied almost instantly, What happened? I waited 2 minutes before answering. I told my wife everything. 3 dots appeared on the screen immediately, then disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, her message arrived. What do you mean, everything? I smiled slightly. About us. There was a long pause, then another message. Are you serious? Yes. Another pause. Then Lena asked the question that would start everything. What did she say? I typed slowly, carefully. She wasn't surprised. The typing dots appeared again immediately. What does that mean? I let the silence sit for a moment, then sent the next message. Apparently, she already knew about Maya and Sophie. The response came almost instantly. Who? Perfect. Meanwhile, I opened another conversation. Maya, I sent her a message too. We need to talk. Her reply arrived seconds later. What's wrong? Lena found out. The phone buzzed in my hand. Another message immediately. Who's Lena? And just like that, the collision had begun. Within minutes, messages started flying across the phone. Lena asking questions, Maya demanding explanations, Sophie suddenly joining the conversation. Apparently, David had been careless enough to use similar phrases with each of them. Promises, future plans, hints about leaving his wife. Now those promises were colliding. And the most fascinating part? None of them believed David was lying. They believed the other women were, which meant something inevitable was coming. Confrontation. Because once people feel betrayed, they want answers. And every one of those answers pointed to the same person, David. By the time David came home that afternoon, the second phone was vibrating almost constantly. Messages, calls, voicemails. 4 different women trying to understand why their future husband suddenly had multiple relationships. David walked through the door smiling, still sweaty from the gym, still relaxed, still completely unaware of what was happening. How's your day going? He asked casually. Pretty quiet, I replied, which technically wasn't a lie, because the real chaos was happening inside his pocket. David walked upstairs to shower, and 30 seconds later, I heard the sound, his normal phone ringing, then ringing again, then again, because the women who couldn't reach the second phone had started calling the other one. David stepped out of the bathroom 10 minutes later, hair still wet, phone in hand, looking confused. Why is Lena calling me? Then his expression changed because Maya called next, then Sophie, then Rachel. 4 names, 4 women, 4 lies, and suddenly, the entire secret life he had carefully built started collapsing at the exact same moment. He looked at me slowly, suspicious, confused. Do you know what's going on? He asked. I smiled softly. No idea. But inside, I already knew something. The second phone hadn't just revealed David's secret life. It had just destroyed it. David stood in the middle of the living room staring at his phone. The calls wouldn't stop. Lena, Maya, Sophie, Rachel. 4 names lighting up the screen, one after another. At first he tried to ignore them. He rejected one call, then another, then a third. But eventually, someone sent a message he couldn't ignore. His phone buzzed again. He opened the message, and I watched his face change. We need to talk. All of us. The message came from Lena, but the screenshot attached underneath it showed something even worse. A group chat, with all 4 women inside it. Apparently, they had done exactly what I expected. They had compared messages, compared promises, compared stories, and every one of those stories pointed to the same person. David. He looked up at me slowly. Did you do something? He asked carefully. I tilted my head slightly. Like what? David studied my face, trying to decide whether I was lying, trying to understand how his entire situation had spiraled out of control in less than an hour. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message. "We're coming to your house." David froze. "Who's coming?" I asked casually. He didn't answer, because 5 seconds later, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house. David looked toward the front door, then back at his phone, then back at me. "Don't answer it," he said quickly, but I was already walking toward the door. When I opened it, 3 women were standing on the porch. Lena, Maya, and Sophie. Rachel must have been further away, but these 3 clearly lived close enough to arrive immediately. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Lena spoke. "Is David here?" I stepped aside calmly. "Yes." They walked into the house together, and the moment David saw them in the living room, every ounce of color drained from his face. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Lena crossed her arms. We compared notes. Maya held up her phone. "You told me you were getting divorced." Sophie stepped forward. "You told me your marriage was already over." David opened his mouth to respond, but Lena cut him off immediately. "You said I was the only one." The room went completely silent, because suddenly, every lie David had told was sitting in the same place, at the same time, looking directly at him. David tried to speak again. "Listen, this is a misunderstanding." "Stop," Lena snapped. "You use the exact same messages with all of us." She turned her phone toward him, scrolling through screenshots, promises, plans, future trips, talks about starting over. And every single message had been sent to multiple women. David looked trapped, cornered, desperate. Finally, he turned toward me. "Emily." His voice sounded almost pleading now. "Can you explain something?" The 3 women looked at me for the first time, clearly realizing something important. They had assumed I was the ex-wife, or the separated wife, not the current one. "Explain what?" I asked calmly. David stared at me. "How they found out." I paused for a moment, then walked over to the coffee table and placed the second phone on it. The room went completely silent. David's eyes widened immediately. "You opened it." "Yes." The 3 women stared at the phone, then back at David, and suddenly, the entire story made sense to them. All the messages, all the lies, all the promises. Maya shook her head slowly. "You're unbelievable." Sophie grabbed her bag. "I'm done." Lena looked at David one last time. "You're not just a liar." She paused. "You're lazy." David blinked, confused. "You didn't even bother changing the story." Then she turned and walked out the door. The other 2 followed, and within 30 seconds, the house was quiet again. David stood in the middle of the room, completely stunned. His secret life, the one he had carefully balanced for months, had collapsed in less than an hour, and for the first time since this all started, he looked at me like he finally understood something. "You knew," he said quietly. "Yes." "For how long?" "Since I opened the second phone." David sank into a chair, silent, defeated, because now there was nothing left to hide. After the women left, the house felt incredibly quiet, not peaceful, not calm, just empty. David was still sitting on the couch, staring at the second phone on the coffee table, like it had personally betrayed him. "You read everything," he said finally. "Yes." "How long ago?" "A few days." David exhaled slowly, trying to process everything that had just happened. "You could have confronted me." "I could have." "But you didn't." "No." He looked at me for a long moment, still searching for some explanation that made sense. "Why would you do that?" he asked. I shrugged slightly. "Because you would have lied." David didn't respond, because we both knew that was exactly what he would have done. "You would have called me paranoid again," I continued. "You would have said I misunderstood something. You would have tried to make me doubt myself." David looked down at the floor. "And maybe," I added quietly, "I would have believed you." The silence between us stretched for several seconds. Finally, David spoke again. "So what happens now?" The question sounded smaller than he probably intended. "Now?" I said. "Yes." I looked toward the second phone on the table, the device that had exposed everything. "Now you live with the consequences." David rubbed his hands together, clearly exhausted. "They won't talk to me again," he said. "No. My reputation at work will probably suffer. My friends will eventually find out." David leaned back in the chair, the confidence he once carried completely gone. "All because of that phone." I shook my head slowly. "No, all because of your choices." That was the moment he stopped arguing, stopped defending himself, stopped pretending he could fix the situation, because the truth was unavoidable now. The second phone hadn't ruined his life. It had only revealed it. David stood up slowly, walked upstairs, and began packing a suitcase. Not everything, just enough clothes for a few days. "Where will you go?" I asked when he came back downstairs. "A hotel," he said quietly. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Before leaving, he stopped near the front door. "I never meant for things to get this complicated," he said. "But complicated situations rarely begin with one mistake. They begin with a pattern, 100 small lies, 100 small decisions. David had made all of them." The door closed behind him, and for the first time in months, the house felt honest again. Later that night, I placed the second phone in a drawer, not because I needed the evidence anymore, but because it had taught me something important. Sometimes the hardest part of discovering betrayal is believing your own instincts. For months, David told me I was paranoid, overthinking, imagining things. But the truth had been sitting quietly in his gym bag the entire time. All it took was opening the phone.